Hi, and welcome to the Oikos Family Podcast. I'm Sonja Wood, and today I'm sharing Chapter 3 with you from The Little Gem, Little Daisy and the Swearing Class. And today's chapter is all about making choices to do what is right every step of the way, even when shiny-looking temptation comes your way. So here in Chapter 3, once again, it's a deep lesson to be learnt, focusing on kindness and loyalty. But it's also an encouragement to do good now, as in planting seeds now, and trusting that they will bear fruit. So, here you go. Here is Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. The Daisy Transplanted. "Betty," said General Foster, stopping the next morning at the fruit woman's store, "could you give up that little girl if you felt sure it was for her good?" Betty sighed and shook her head mournfully as she answered, "I've always looked to give her up, sir, if Sassyfoots, or whatever their name is, turned up. If it was for her good, never a word would they hear from me. Although Jack and me would feel bad. You're not telling me you've found her friends since last night, sir?" "Not the people she belongs to, certainly, Betty. I have found those who will become friends to her. If you will consent, they will provide for her. She should go to school and become well educated. Do you not think so?" "Indeed. None knows that better than myself, sir." "Is it yourself that's the friends you're speaking of?" Betty gave a searching look into the gentleman's face. He smiled. "Yes," he said. "I would like to put her in school and take care of her. She seems to be a sweet child and a good one. You see, Betty, I have it in my power to do more to find her friends than you are able to do. We may trace them yet. If we never find them, I will promise to provide for her as long as it may be necessary. Are you willing?" Betty again stared into the face of the general, as if she would look him through. "I am sensible of your kindness, sir," she answered. "You see, I'm in a way responsible for the child. I'd say yes and thank you kindly, but you'll excuse my plain speaking. You're a stranger to me. I could not part with Margaret unless I was certain of your character. For if I didn't think she would be brought up right, never a step would she go with you. I saw Miss Gertrude Elston walking with you once last summer, sir, just after I set up my stand here. She never noticed me. I used to be laundrywoman in her mother's house before I married. Miss Gertrude was a sweet and good child, as you're saying of Margaret. She'll never go far wrong, I'm sure of that. You just bring me a line from her, and if she says you're all right, I'll not say no." General Foster laughed heartily, not a bit offended at Betty's plain speaking. "Miss Gertrude Elston, as you call her, will give me all the lines you want, Betty. She thought me right enough to marry me. She is my wife." "Is it so, sir?" said Betty, dropping the rosy apple she held. She gazed at the gentleman with a mixture of curiosity and admiration that was amusing to see. "If Miss Gertrude manages you, that is character enough. I'll say take the child and my blessing on all of you. When she gets among you fine folks, you will not let her forget the woman who cared for her when there was no one else to do it, will you, sir? You will let me see her once in a while." The general readily promised this, and went on to tell Betty what plans he and his wife had for Daisy. First, she would go for a while to his home, where Mrs. Foster would provide her with proper clothing. Then they would send her to Miss Collins's boarding school. Miss Collins would teach and train her in a way that would satisfy her family if they should ever find her. Daisy would also have training so she could someday earn her own living if necessary. "I'm glad she will have the bringing up of a lady. I couldn't give her that," said Betty with another sigh. Her heart hurt to part with her darling. She cannot become more of a lady than she is now, even if you dress her in jewels, silks, and satins. Never a rough word nor way about her in the 2 years she has spent with Jack and me. You could not find a prettier behaved child in all the land. An hour or two later, Betty found a friend to watch her stall for her. She guided General Foster to the tiny house in the suburbs of the city where she lived with Daisy and Jack. The 2 children were in the garden, gathering flowers for the bouquets Daisy sold. They looked up when they heard the gate open. The children expressed surprise to see Betty home at this unusual hour, and to see the gentleman with her. Daisy flushed and smiled with delight upon hearing what the gentleman, who looked so like Papa, planned for her. However, the little face shadowed over, and she shook her head gently but firmly when asked if she would go. "And why not, dear?" asked Betty. "Surely you will not throw away a chance like this." Daisy shook her head again. Then, first begging the gentleman's pardon, she stepped up to her faithful friend. She put her arms about her neck and whispered something in her ear. The tears Betty had kept back with trouble now came to her eyes. "Oh, is that it, honey?" she said. "Don't let that trouble your dear heart. What a tender, grateful little soul you are." While she lovingly soothed the little girl, Betty went on. "You see, sir, it's just as I said. She is a lady, every inch of her. There's a matter of back rent due, although my landlord is good as gold, and other bills with the druggist, baker, and the grocery man. I've never caught up since the child was sick. She says she won't leave now that she can help by selling her flowers." Drawing the child to him, General Foster whispered to her. He promised to pay the back rent and bills if she would come with him. Daisy, feeling nearer home and friends than ever since the dreadful day of the shipwreck, put her hand trustingly in his. The parting went hard. Daisy could not leave those kind friends who shared their little with her without sad tears. Betty kissed and clung to her. She pronounced God's blessings upon her. Jack hung over the gate, uttering frantic howls as he watched the sobbing child led away by her new protector. Jack gave no thought to the other boys who flocked to see what ailed him. They admired Jack because he was bigger, stronger, and braver than any other boy of his age among the group. He was also their terror. He allowed no bad word to be used in his presence, banishing all who offended him from their games. He chose as his favorites and chief companions those who were careful not to take God's name in vain. One heard cursing and swearing less frequently among the lanes and lots lying around the humble house. Daisy had bloomed and grown during the 2 years she lived there. Unknown to her, she planted her good seed upon the path which God chose for her. Betty went back to her stand with a sad heart. She knew when she went home that night she would miss the sweet little face. Daisy had brightened and cheered her after many a hard day's work. She felt half consoled for her own loss when she saw Daisy coming down the street holding General Foster's hand. The General had taken the little girl to a store and bought her new clothes. However, Daisy was as much a lady in the coarse but clean calico frock she had worn yesterday as she was in the new clothes. The sweet manners and pretty ways she had never lost made her a lady. The new garments covered as warm and loving a little heart as the old ones had done. Betty knew that pride would have no place in Daisy's heart. As she reached the stand, Daisy ran behind the stall and threw her arms about Betty's neck. She kissed her again and again, as lovingly as she had when she had no other friend in the world. Gentle Mrs. Foster gave Daisy a warm welcome to her new home. The child fell at once into the ways and habits of those about her, plainly showing that they were not new to her. She had at some time lived different from the way she had lived for the past 2 years. She had charming ways of her own and showed dainty grace in her speech and behavior. The little girl cared for others with a thoughtfulness that was surprising in a child her age. Daisy, no older than about 8, had received careful training at one time. The lessons learned had taken deep root, not forgotten in spite of the long separation from her home and family. The Fosters had intended to send the little girl to boarding school at Miss Collins's. However, she soon grew so close to the hearts of her new friends that they could not bear to part with her. For the present at least, they decided that their home would become hers. Daisy would go to Miss Collins for the morning, as most of the other little girls in Glenwood did. Mrs. Foster could not bear to send this loving child from her. Daisy's greatest happiness seemed to be in making others happy. She grew more and more interesting every day. The familiar objects and customs about her called up past recollections of the home and parents she had lost. She would watch the General for hours at a time as he sat reading or writing. She followed him with wistful eyes as he mounted his horse and rode down the broad avenue, just like Papa. The little girl hung over the smaller Daisy as she lay sleeping. Because she looks as our baby at home used to. She delighted to wait upon her and Mrs. Foster in a neat-handed manner. Loving service came naturally to her. She never called the infant baby, as the rest of the family did. With her it was always, "Little Daisy." She seemed to love the pretty name, whether given to herself or another. All the variety of choice flowers which filled the Foster's garden could not win her affection from her old favorite. Daisies remained her favorite, because Mamma loved them so and named me after them. Although she remembered so much, the child could not recall the name of her parents or where they had lived. Their name was not what Betty called it, she was sure, but nonetheless it had passed from her mind. Francine, the French maid, called Daisy's mamma Madame, and Daisy Mademoiselle Marguerite. When asked what other people used to call Mamma and Papa, the little face grew clouded and pained with the effort to remember. When they mentioned name after name to her, she shook her head at each one. The General tried by every means in his power to discover the girl's family. He knew that they must still mourn the loss of their sweet little Daisy Blossom. As week after week went by, he and his wife decided, unless her relations came to claim her, she would stay with them. She was an added ray of light where all had been brightness and sunshine before. Daisy was a lovely, precious little flower, lending new fragrance and beauty to the home where she blossomed.